Happy New Year, happy Kwanzaa, and welcome to the Sacred Moments Podcast, formerly known as the Best Life of Wellbeing Podcast. My name is Donna Marie, and this is my first interview in 9 months. On New Moon Monday, December 30th, 2024, during the fifth day of Kwanzaa, which celebrates the principle of Nia, which means purpose, I reconnected with my purpose, which is to honor life, embrace transition, and preserve legacy. In this conversation, I am talking to my family member, Dr. Obie Cleveland Hill. And as you can see in the background, there's an unveiling of a bust. It happened on December 7th, 2024. It's located in the gym at Nicholls State University. And there's a beautiful story regarding the design of this bust, which we will discuss in this interview.
The idea being that we're creating these pieces of art, we're creating these monuments in order to inspire the youth. Future generations, they would ask, inquire, and hopefully be inspired by the experiences of their ancestors. This piece took about a year, 14 months. Cleve would come and sit, and we would have wonderful, lively conversations. And in doing that, I would be able to measure the expression, the depth of Cleveland's personality, and hopefully convey that in the material. This piece is made out of bronze. The sculpture is cast in bronze. It's originally sculpted in clay and then casted in bronze, and then the base is sapele wood.
This is my first time seeing it, and I want to relate to what Sam said. Over that 13, 14 months, it was never a dull moment, I promise you.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Sacred Moment Podcast is where we celebrate life while honoring the sacred uniqueness of each guest and their story and personal journey. At the same time, we highlight the profound wisdom that death offers by normalizing conversation about our mortality, grief, and the intentionality we need around end-of-life planning. The first principle of Kwanzaa is unity. It's umoja. And so these principles are the reason I wanted to have this conversation is because in many ways I see you living out these principles in your life as an educator, as a leader, a philosopher, a servant leader, not just a leader, but also a leader in education, a veteran, you're an instructor. And even with the Sunday school we do on Sunday, am I right that you've been doing that for 30 years?
Oh, it's been closer to 40 now.
Yeah. The definition here, the description is to strive for and maintain unity in family, community, nation, and our heritage. And so your Christian heritage, you have definitely created unity and consistency. I see that in your family as well. Also, when I was at your house, we talked a little bit about you all moving into a different place. And one of the reasons you moved to a new house is because you were thinking about your end of life and how that space would accommodate you as you grew, you and your wife as you grew, and the family as you grew older. I was like, we should talk about these end of life things. And so I think that was a great decision for you and your family, obviously. And I wanted to learn more about you. So thank you for making the time for me.
No problem at all. I always love to do things like this if it's going to be a benefit to others. And I know you're using the phrase end of life. I like to think of it also as end of abilities, because, there's a lot of, even before end of life, your physical abilities decline. And so the space that we were in before did not accommodate, things like wheelchairs and ramps and stuff like that. So yeah, it's end of life, but it's also in the physical abilities and mental abilities. Well, I was born and raised in Enterprise, Mississippi. I stayed there until 1964 when I moved to Moss Point, Mississippi.
What age did you move to Moss Point?
I was 14 years old.
Tell me a little bit about your mom and your dad. I first want to know how they met. You might not know that, but because I've met your dad, I never met your mom. And if your mom is more like you, I just wonder how the two got together.
Well, yeah, I really don't know all of the details. My mom was actually born and raised in Enterprise, never left Enterprise, the whole time. My dad was born up in a little town called Artesia, Mississippi, which is close to West Point, Mississippi. And his grandmother, my great grandmother, actually raised him and his sister after their mother passed away. And my my great grandmother, my paternal great grandmother, was a very, very tough, tough lady. Uh, I remember, I remember when I was like 5 years old, you know, uh, she put a whipping on me that I still feel to this day, you know. I mean, she was that tough. She's only about 5'7", but she was not afraid of anything or anybody. She had a lot of children, about two husbands, and I'm told some of the stories about her and how she raised her children. She had one son who was supposedly very gossipy, telling the family business. And so to stop him from gossiping, I'm told she took some scissors and clipped off the tip of his tongue.
Oh.
Okay, now, so she was very, very tough. But the thing that I remember about her, she died when I was 6. I remember that whipping, but I also remember she made the best tea cakes in the world. And boy, I tell you, I've never had any since then like that. So when she moved to Enterprise, Mississippi, she actually moved in a rental house, and it was right across the street from where my mother lived. And I'm assuming that that's how they, got together. My daddy had a short temper, and he was the type of person that would react before he would think sometimes. You know, when you saw him as an older man, he had calmed down a bit. But, you know, one of his weaknesses, like his father, was alcohol. The strange thing about it is he was short-tempered when he was not drinking, and he was very lovable when he was drinking. Whereas on the other hand, some people get very, very mean when they're drinking. He was not like that. My mother, on the other hand, you had to push her to the very limits before she would get very angry. And I knew the one thing that I know that I'm like her is that I have to be pushed to get angry. I don't like to get angry. But when I do get angry, it takes me a long time to recover. Some people can get angry today and tomorrow they find everything's okay. And so when I am pushed to the limit like my mother and I get angry, it might take me 3 or 4 days to get over it, and that's why I don't like it. So that even temperament that she had, I know that I got that from her. And a lot of it came, I think, like I said on Sunday, I think a lot of it is genetic, but I think a lot of it came from me just hanging around her all the time. I mean, back in the 50s, my mother and I used to sit and watch soap operas together. My brothers and them would be outside playing cowboys, but I'd be in there watching The Edge of Night with my mother, and we discuss it. And it was just fun to be around her. And I'm sure that I picked up some of her even keel, slow to anger, kind to everybody personality. I'm sure I picked some of that up genetically, but also just by being around her all the time.
Are there any aspects of your dad's personality that you notice in yourself?
Yeah, a few of them. I like to get things done. I don't like to procrastinate. We often talk about people who work hard to achieve things. I don't think hard work is something that just comes naturally. I think some of that is God-given. I think some of that is something you inherit. And I just, I've always had the ability, I'm going to use that term, to work hard at task until I get it done. And also have the ability to not give up on a task
Mm-hmm.
until it's done. But I also have the detriment of getting frustrated very easily when things are not going my way. And I know I get all of that from my dad too.
Umoja is unity. And then the second principle is Kuju Chakalia. And the questions I'm asking now are aligned under that principle, which is self-determination. And it's to define ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves. And so I'm just going to start with the second principle just a bit and continue with the questioning, because a young child from Mississippi, would you say you lost your mother at 12? Would you say you grew up financially poor?
Very, very poor. The whole time I lived in Enterprise, we never had any indoor plumbing. My dad worked as a laborer most of his life. And of course, my mom was she was a homemaker. But, when things came around, like picking cotton and stuff like that, pulling potatoes out of the field, for whites who own these big farms and things like that, she took advantage of that to earn a little extra money. Believe it or not, sometimes people would bring bushels and bushels of peas and things to our house, and she and some other lady would get there and shell the peas, put them in plastic bags and things like that, and give it back to the people. And they made a few dollars extra. It was always a situation where we were trying to make ends meet. And we had our garden and stuff like that. But, you know, it was uh, it was always, I guess, a matter of survival on the one hand, but the majority of people around us were in the same boat. And so when people are in the same boat as you are for the most part, you don't really know that you're poor because you
Yeah.
think everybody else. And when I say poor, I'm also describing poor and ignorant. Donna, I remember when my sister's husband's family moved to Enterprise, and they were talking about outhouses and how it was disgusting because he was a minister and they had to move into a parsonage where there was an outhouse. And I asked, one of the sons, well, how did you all get your water where you came from? And he said, well, we got it from the city. And in my mind, you took buckets down to a pump in the city and you got your water. You brought it back home. He said, no, no, the water is piped into our house from the city too. I just couldn't conceptualize that because I had never seen anything like that before. And so when everybody else around you is in the same boat that you're in, it doesn't hurt you as much. And also, you also remember, even though we were poor, there were those times you talk about unity. There were those times when, we got together and we enjoyed being together, you know. It was not only for holidays. Our house, even though we were poor, our house was the place that everybody liked to come to and enjoy themselves. And I think in part I think we kind of kept our small community together. Yeah.
Speaking of community, um, when your mother was no longer around, what was the support community like? You didn't have that nurturer in your mom. Did you have aunts or, you know?
One of the things that have always tugged at my heart, if you will, just before my mother died, my sister had finally got a break and she had moved to Dayton, Ohio with a couple. And they were going to send her to school and everything. All she had to do was babysit for them and stuff like that. This was like in December 1961. Well, a month later, right after Christmas, my mom took to her bed, and we just think, well, she's going to be okay. And so by January 15th, she was gone. That's in 1962, less than a month. So my sister had to come back home to take care of us for the most part. And so she gave up a promising career um, to come back and take care of her brothers. And I've always been thankful for that. So she was there and she was trying to go to school and make something out of her life there. And then in 1962, not long after my mom died, she met Marvis's father and they started dating and then they got married in December 1963. And so she lived right across the street from us. But at home were just myself and my two other brothers. And my older brother, of course, they had already moved away. So we would get support from them from time to time. We would get support from people in the community from time to time, like, hey, here's a cake or here's a pie, or something like that. But it was a desperate time. And my great aunt, who was up in age, she had moved in with us and she got a welfare check, $36 at the end of the month. And she contributed what she could. So we had a network, a supportive network, but in all honesty, it wasn't that much. It was very tough.
So would you say that, and again, remember, this is under the principle of self-determination, that the circumstances of your life could have caused you to take a different route than what you chose to take?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Keep in mind too, Donna, that my dad and his dad before him, they always had a problem with alcohol. And after my mom died, my dad really spiraled down. You know, we would go sometime several months before we would even see him again. He still had a job. I don't know how he kept it, but most of his money sure went to alcohol and for rent. So we very seldom. Every now and then he'd show up and bring some staples like sugar and flour and stuff like that, but that was not very often. And again, this was in January 1962. And in I guess the summer of 1964, it seemed like that's when he finally began to come out of his tailspin and he came home. But he had lost his job also by then, and I think that's when he realized he needed to straighten up. But that alcohol uh, dependence was still there.
Yeah.
And there was not much support. And so one of the reasons I wanted to get away from that is because of that and the poverty and the other things that were going on there. But the other thing is that as young as I was, I still had a vision of doing something other than what most people do. They either farmed, they worked as laborers, cutting pulpwood and stuff like that. And I just knew that there had to be something better than that. In fact, I told one lady one time that I worked for all the time, I always did labor jobs for her. And I told her one day, I'm not going to be doing this. I'm going to be working in an office one day. And this lady laughed so hard she almost passed out. She couldn't believe I was thinking something because nobody else did that.
Yeah.
Nobody thought about things like that. So deep down somewhere, I knew that there was something better than what we had.
We'll say about your dad, as you were talking about him, grief does some really strange things to people, particularly when they don't deal with it, when they don't know that it exists, when they bury those feelings. And I can imagine your father was experiencing a whole lot of grief, and the only coping mechanism he had was the alcohol.
Yes, yeah, because he never knew how to express his feelings. You know, uh, I saw him break down twice in my life. When he came home one morning to tell us our mother had passed, and he was just telling her, and his voice cracked only for a second or two, and then he regained himself, and you know, he just was not the type that was going to show his emotions, and that's not a knock on him because most African American men did not know how to show emotion.
Right.
They internalize a lot of things, which I think deep down cause a lot of them to die early in their lives. Believe me, I do.
Everybody back then, your mom as well as your dad, your aunts, your grandmother, your great grandmother, they had to learn how to dispose of their emotions in some way because life was
Hmm.
so difficult and so unfair. And so dealing with them, feeling them, acknowledging them, it didn't serve them, I'm sure.
No, no, you
Yeah,
know, he didn't want to show signs of weakness at all.
right. What was your respect like for your father? You know, were you angry with him, the fact that he wasn't there? Again, your life has turned out to be a miraculous blessing to many, and you've accomplished a whole lot. And another person in that same experience with an alcoholic father and without a mother would have allowed whatever anger they had inside to control them and to defeat them.
Hmm.
So just curious how you felt and how you managed it too.
Anger was probably part of it. The other was disappointment, you know, because like I said, one thing I learned from my dad, one of the few things I learned from him was how to work hard. And at the time, I just didn't think he was working hard enough to overcome his demons. So fast forward, here it is, 1964 summer. He's finally home. He is trying to straighten up his life and everything. And my older brother, who's right next to me, had always gone to Moss Point to help out my great uncle that lived there. And my great uncle just loved him, you know. And when he came back home after being there for a while, he was asked to come back because my great uncle in Moss Point had had a stroke, a series of strokes. But he said he did not want to go back because he um, wanted to graduate with his high school class. And so I volunteered to leave. Now, my dad did not want me to go, but my brother and my cousin convinced him this was an opportunity for me. And so I did go to law school. I came back to Enterprise in January of 65 with my great aunt. My uncle had passed away by then. I came back, I saw my dad then. I did not see him again until 1971. I was a junior in college. I went 6 years without seeing my father. He missed a lot of things, getting a scholarship to college, playing high school basketball, a lot of things that he missed. That's the disappointing part. You always want your parents to be there to see those type of things. Um, how did I feel at the time? Yeah, a little anger, a little disappointment. But as we got older and began to get together again, I was able to overcome all of that. To God's grace, I was able to overcome that. I don't think my dad ever got over it though. One of the things that he asked me a few months before he died, he and I were sitting alone, and he just said, "Do you love me?" And I said, "Wow." I said, "Yes, of course I love you. You're my father." And I think what he was saying is, I have been a disappointment to you all in your life.
Yeah.
And by rights, you have a right to dislike me. But he needed that reassurance that his children still cared about him. And of course, I did. So a lot of the things I felt at the time, anger, disappointment, in the long run, I was able to get over it. And I'm glad I did because those type of things do more damage to you than they do to anybody else.
So would you consider that again time you were able to forgive?
Hmm. Yes, yes. And I'm glad I did. I had to because, like I said, those things eat away at you. And at the end of the day, it causes more damage to you than it does to anybody else. So you need to learn to get over your anger. Yes.
You know, one thing I have learned over the past few years is that none of us know, and obviously we all know this, but it really became real to me, I would say a few years ago, but none of us really know our parents' story.
hmm
or a sibling or a spouse. There are aspects of the story of a person's life that they don't share,
hmm
that in some cases they don't remember they experienced it, but it's still impacting the way they show up in the world.
hmm
And so who knows what your dad went through? To be an alcoholic, you're constantly avoiding feeling. You're drowning your sorrows in the bottle, or so something happened. And alcoholism is genetic, but I think in a lot of cases we don't know how to deal with the root cause of an issue, and alcohol is a way for some people to deal with it, or to ignore it, or not to feel it.
Yeah, and African Americans in general, but African American men in particular, would they,
Yeah.
maybe more so now than what they used to, but that was a time when African American men were expected to, and I guess a lot of that comes out of slavery. You expected to
Exactly.
endure pain and things like that, and not complain about it, not talk about it, just internalize it. And of course, it does a lot of damage to you. Yeah.
So as your life went
Like I
on.
said, I got to Moss Point in September '64 to help take care of my great uncle who had those strokes. And of course, he passed away in November '64.
Mhm.
And I, I was never told this directly, but my great aunt was telling another lady one time that one of his last wishes before he, went into a coma was that you need to keep that boy with you because you're going to need him, and that was me, because if it had been left to her, she would have sent me back to Enterprise. So I stayed there. And then, I was 6'4" at the time. So word came to her that the basketball coach wanted me to play basketball. He had never approached me. I was in high school, but he approached my cousin who told my aunt, and so that's how I started playing basketball. And started out just not knowing anything about the game, not anything about organized sports and everything. Before the year was out, in ninth grade, I was on the starting basketball team. You know, and so that's how my career uh, began. You know, and I'm going back to this thing you talked about, unity. High school basketball, college basketball, military service, and military basketball. You play with the team. You have to be unified. Unity is what's going to make you successful. Whatever one person can do, a team can do it always much better. So the unity that was bred into me has lasted me into my adulthood as an administrator, as a teacher, and things that I tell to young men and women when I talk to them. So this unity that is, associated with Kwanzaa is directly related to being part of teams as you are growing up. And that stays with you, especially through military service, 20 years of military service. If you try to do things on your own, a lot of times you're just going to fail. When you do it as a team, a lot of times you're successful. So it is very much a parallel to what one of the Kwanzaa principles teach. But that family aspect to it, that's a sense of community,
Yes.
and that builds your culture. When we used to butcher a hog, or somebody in the community would butcher a hog. It wasn't just for us. We send some meat to this family, we send some meat to this family, and stuff like that. But those families would come over and help us with the cleaning of the hog and cutting the meat up into pieces. Those little bitty things was what made bonding of people so much, so much better in that sense in those days. And when you see that coming up as a child, that stays with you.
Yeah.
Some of and you probably can identify with this. Some of the greatest times we've had as families is when we all get together. So, sometimes we break out into fights and things like that, but for the most part, we have some good memories of times we spent together,
Yeah.
and you and I had dinner in Washington a few years ago, and that was really a good time for me. But I guess it all comes from what you learn as you are on this journey. I guess you might say the value of being unified with others is so much greater than trying to do things by yourself or alone.
Um, as a Christian, I'm sure you can look back over your life and see very clearly how your steps were ordered. You didn't choose to play, well, you did choose to play basketball, but it wasn't something you initiated. Um,
Mhm.
every aspect of what you have shared with me so far is divine intervention. It's God
Mhm.
directing your path, and you didn't know what was going, nobody knew what was going on, but directing your steps in order for you to become the success that you are today. You get to work in that office.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the themes I always go back to is this, you know, when I met Lois, she was dating somebody else, and I was dating somebody else, and we didn't even get off to a good start. You know, she said something to me which I didn't like, you know, but
Which is like
over
all the strong-tongued women in our family say something that you might not like. That comes easy for
exa
us.
exactly, but over a period of months, we started talking and talking. I never, I still never had any intentions of us developing a relationship. Um, and don't get me wrong, it was not always smooth. But within a year, we were talking about marriage. And I say that to say this. I quoted Steve Jobs on a number of occasions on church speeches, and he always said, "You don't gain perspective looking forward, you gain perspective looking back." Okay. My perspective at that time was these are decisions that we are making. But now looking back on it, you're absolutely right. Now we can understand that this is part of what God wanted.
Yeah.
My pastor always says that if you want to make God laugh, tell him about your plans. Okay. And so us meeting, getting married under tumultuous situations, me dating somebody else, she dating somebody else, having children that have grown up to be the apple of my eye is girls, never wanting girls, at first, wanting the son, like most men do.
Right,
Having
right.
grandchildren, looking back on this now, the perspective I've gained is that, God ordered this. God put this together. And I'm finally glad that I've gotten to a point in my life where I can realize that because there was a time, like you said, none of us realize those things. We don't look at the big picture looking forward, but we can look at the big picture when we gain perspective and start looking back at life.
Yeah. And for me personally, starting off as a young parent and struggling and creating much of my own struggle, right?
Mhm.
I've never learned how to be calm in trusting God to direct my steps
Mhm.
because I'm always in survival mode. I've always been in survival mode. Have you reached that point where you can say, I can relax because I know God has got me?
Not yet. Not yet. I know God has got me, but I have not learned to relax. In fact, I'll carry it a step further. I don't know what I would do with myself if I did relax.
Yeah.
I always, when I started working on my doctorate, you know, and I was working full-time job, and I was still in the Army Reserve at the time, I was always under a time constraint to get things done, and I don't know if I ever shared this with you or not, but the day that I defended my dissertation and told that I had made it and everything, I came home that night and went to bed and woke up by 2 o'clock in the morning. My whole body was gyrating, even, you know, throwing up,
Oh,
and
wow.
immediately went to I was laying at 2 o'clock in the morning, like, oh Lord, I did all this work and now I'm going to die. So I go to the doctor the next day, and the first thing I told him exactly what happened. The first thing he said is is there any stress that you been under that you don't have anymore? I said, yeah. I told him about the doctor and everything. He said, it's just your body reacting to not having stress. Okay.
Wow.
But saying all that to say this, since that period of my life, 6 years, I still have not learned to relax, to rest. I always feel like I need to be doing something and doing something ahead of time. Like now I'm trying to imagine, and, I'm 75 years old now. If I get out of teaching, what would I do? That's a scary proposition for me. So I guess in a sense, I'm in survival mode too.
I don't want to miss how you got to that doctorate. I'd like to go through the story a bit. So you're in high school, you're 6'4", you're the high, you scored the high, you have the highest scoring game. You were awarded a scholarship to Nicholls later on. In 68, you won the conference, your team won the conference championship. And your one, I don't know what the one loss record is. Like, what is a one loss record?
My senior year in high school, our one loss record was 24-6, the best that the school had ever had up until that point. And remember, I went to a segregated high school. And so 2 years later, the high school was, no longer. It was a junior high school now. So I guess that record still stands here.
Oh, wow, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
So then you got a scholarship to Nicholls State University as the first African American athlete. And there, you had the all-time lead, you were the all-time leading scorer and rebounder. You were the MVP 3 times. You were the team captain 3 times. You had an honorable mention, All-American honorable mention. You were
Mhm.
inducted into the Athletic Hall of Fame at Nicholls State University, and inducted into the Athletic Hall of Fame at Nicholls University, and then named Mr. Louisiana Basketball by the Louisiana Association of Basketball Coaches. And
Mhm.
so, how do you even feel hearing me read all that? I know you've seen it on paper and you've heard it many times, but
Yeah.
how does it feel when you hear people talk about all of these pretty amazing accomplishments?
Well, I have to relate it to what we just finished talking about. Um, when I was approached about coming to Nicholls State University and being the first Black athlete at the school, it was Francis T. Nicholls State College at the time. My first thought was, I'm not going there. This is crazy. Um, but and I know you uh, can't, imagine all of this because at that day and time, 1968, it was all about desegregating these all white colleges and universities. And so, uh, first thing I told my high school coach is, I'm not going there. He said, look, let me tell you something. He said, and I'm paraphrasing him, but he basically said that, these things have got to be done. And you are in a position to do it and be successful at it. And I said, sure, okay, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Still didn't think much about it, but I did agree to come and visit Nicholls State University. And then on my first visit there, I had another kid from Jackson, Mississippi. His coach had brought him there. And his coach, I overheard a conversation between his coach and Nicholls' president at the time. And his coach asked the president of Nicholls, you know, why are you all trying to integrate now? The president at the time said, well, it's time to do this thing. We got to get it done. And now's the time to get it done. That was very much what my high school coach had said. It's time to get it done, you know? And I relate that to what we just talked about because that's when I made the decision to come to Nicholls. But I also now look back in perspective, that was still God saying that, all right, I got you here. This thing needs to be done. You're the person to do it, you know. Um, he was guiding my thoughts. He was guiding my thinking. He was guiding my direction and everything. And of course, I didn't know it at the time. I know it now, but that was all part of his plan. Yeah. So all of those things you just talked about, they are just part of his plan for my life. I know that now. Didn't know it then.
Was it hard for you to learn how to play basketball?
No, no,
Did
it
it
wasn't.
come pretty naturally for you?
It came naturally for me, but you know, Donna, I always felt like I wasn't good enough. I always looked at other people and their abilities, and people kept telling me, "Well, you're good, you're good." And I thought, well, I'm not as good as so and so, and I'm not as good as so and so. I never had a lot of confidence in my abilities, you know, and it probably kept me from being in professional basketball, not having the confidence. But it came pretty easy for me, you know, looking back on it now.
How
Yeah.
tall are you now? You were 6'4" in high school.
I was 6'4" when in the ninth grade. I was 6'8" when I left high school, the same height I'm at right now. Those things you talked about and described, you know, it's part of being at the right place at the right time, but it's part of, you know, receiving the thing God had planned for me all along.
All right. So we get to college. We're the first African American male. What was that like? Like here you go again with the adversity or potential for adversity. Another situation that could cause you to be angry and to be
To
resentful.
tell you the truth, my first 2 years at Nicholls were pretty bad. You know, I mean, as long as I was on the basketball court, I was fine. You know, and I tell people this all the time. Uh, there were there was one very racist incident that I had with a teammate, but I had a number of what we call microaggressions today.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when I described the things that I got from my mother, you know, that was part of the problem that I had because a lot of those things I would hear and I would not react. I would just internalize it, you know. My last 2 years were a lot better because we had more black athletes there. We had more black people on campus. And of course, you know, I met my wife and some of her friends in my last year there. But my first 2 years, they left me pretty angry. And so when I went into the Army, my first 3 years in the Army, I was a pretty angry young man because then I started remembering all of those microaggressions and I started remembering that one very bad racist incident that I had to deal with. And I was really angry. But then uh, you know, it was so cold in Alaska. That's where I was stationed at the time. It was so cold in there. We didn't get a chance to go very many places. But we would get the Seattle Post on a Saturday, a Sunday Seattle Post. It would be this thick, you know. And so I sit there and read it from cover to cover. And I saw this article in there and I started reading it. And then and it was written by a white guy, but it was basically this. I was carjacked and I was shot by a black man who left me on the side of the road to die. It was raining, it was cold, it was freezing, and he left me out there to die. Some might wonder why I don't hate all black people for what he did. However, it was another black man who found me, put me in his car, took me to the hospital, waited there with me, saved my life until my family called my family until they could get there. He said, the reason I don't hate people is because if I focus on simply what that bad man did, I would hate them. I choose to focus on what that good man did. And similar to what I always talk about in Philippians 4th chapter 8th verse, I focus on the good. And that kind of changed my perspective because even in those first 2 years at Nicholls, even though there was a lot of microaggressions, even though there was one racist incident, there were some very decent people who treated me kindly. And so I stopped focusing on those fools, if you will, and I started focusing on those people who were very kind with me. And believe me, that thing that God led me to read, it really changed me about how I look at people, you know. Um, so yeah, first 2 years were not that good. I did leave there angry, but I had that one incident that turned me around about how I deal with people. And I still see people today who can only focus on the bad. They cannot, for some reason, focus on the good things that have happened in life. And if they did that more, then there would be so much less hatred in the world.
I don't know if you've recognized in Sunday school, I pick up on words and just write them down. And so, the first word that comes to mind is forgiveness. You were able to forgive. And that
Mhm.
forgiveness was really medicine for you. It allowed you to release anything that could have possibly been held in your heart. Forgiveness, you talked about you reading, that's important, reading.
Mhm.
Your commitment to finish what you started, you focusing on the good and slash gratitude.
Mhm.
And in the very beginning, you were respectful of your elders. Even though that whipping, you can still feel it today. You you respected your elders. And so I highlight those things because for anyone listening, I just think they need to be highlighted. I also want to say that we've talked about more than two of the Kwanzaa principles, because the third Kwanzaa principle, which is celebrated on my mother's birthday, December 28th, is Ujima, and it's collective works and responsibility, which kind of aligns with the unity. And so it's to build and maintain our communities together and to make our sisters and brothers' problems our problems and to solve them together. And
Mhm.
so that again aligns with the unity. And you've made it very clear that with all of the people in your life, there was collective works and responsibility. And then you've grown up to be a person who continues to perpetuate that in the world. The fourth principle is Ujama, cooperative economics, and it's to build and maintain our own stores, shops, and other businesses and to profit from them together. And so I'm gonna just stop with that. You went to college and then the Army.
Right. I had my bachelor's degree when I went in. Quite frankly, I graduated in 72 with a bachelor's degree in liberal arts. Well, the economy was in shambles. Nobody was hiring people, you know. Vietnam War was going on. It was still raging. And for 4 years in college, I was sweating bullets, thought I was going to get drafted. In fact, at one time, I was reclassified as a 1A. But thank goodness I managed to finish college without being drafted. But then I can't find a job. So I said, well, I'm going to join the Army. And everybody said, you got to be crazy. In fact, when I went to the recruiting office, the guy asked me, have you finished high school? I said, yes. He said, well, have you went to college? And I said, yes, I just graduated from college. He said, let me see your arms, you know?
I
And I
don't know
said,
if you were on drugs. Like,
yeah, he said, I just want to see if there was any needle tracks on you. He said, you got to be crazy. A college degree and you join the Army in the middle of a war? I said, I need a job. Getting ready to get married. I need a job. And so I joined the Army. And I have no regrets because it allowed me to see and do some things I never would have done without joining the Army. And then when I stayed out 10 years, went back into the reserves, and retired in 2002 from the Army, uh, you know, it's never been so much about institutions for me. The Army is an institution. Nicholls State University is an institution. It's about the people you meet that you build relationships with and they last a lifetime. That's what I'm most proud of. Yeah. I never expressed this to you, but when your dad passed away, that was a that was a void in my life that I just could not. I didn't think I would ever overcome that, and to this day I haven't fully overcome it. But that took a lot out of me. Because we had grown to be pretty good friends, and I don't have a lot of male friends, and so he was a vital part of my life, but my family's life. My brothers and sisters love your dad,
Yeah.
and I think they love him more than they love me sometimes. But they did, they really did. So he became a part of our family, like unbelievable part. So yeah.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Cooperative economics. It says to maintain our stores and our shops. And I think all of that is just community,
Hmm.
maintaining your wealth. And so I'll just ask you a question about money. And so growing up poor, and then you went to college on scholarship, you finally got a job with the Army. Um, what was your relationship with money coming from a financially impoverished background?
Well, I had to learn what money really was about. There's I forget the lady's name that wrote a book one time, and she said that poor people think money is something that you spend. That's what you do. Only thing you do with it is spend. Middle class people uh, think money is only for saving, and wealthy people think money is to make more money. You know, I had to go from that first tier to the second tier. You know, you know, when we first got married. When I was in the Army and thing. When my paycheck came, it's time to spend it. I had to learn that, you're going to get old one day and you're going to have to learn how to save, and not only save um, for a particular thing that you want to buy, you have to learn to save to prepare for when you get to a certain age and you cannot work anymore. I think I've done pretty well in that tier. Still, we have so many people that in our ethnic group, our race, that are poor, and they are still in that first tier. Anytime they get anything, uh, but they're going to spend it, even if they win the lottery. Within 2 years after they win the lottery, they're going to be because they're going to spend, 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 and until I don't want to sound too negative because on the one hand, I think that principle is being met to a greater extent than we hear about, because we always hear about what people are not doing. But I think especially in the urban areas, we have people who have their own stores and their own shops and things like that. So I think they're doing that to a great extent. But I still think we have too many people who think it's only for spending. And when they don't get to that second tier and think about the saving for their future until they get to that point, then we're going to have some of the same uh, problems we have uh, taking care of our aged, taking care of our children that we have now, because we spend too much on too many things that are just not important. But that's what we think money is for, to spend.
And it's a mindset, and that also
Mhm.
is, part of that slave mentality.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's definitely a mindset. And I'm glad you said that about the three tiers, what you read, because that's important for people to hear. And definitely, in that third tier,
making more money is investing. It's not getting another job, but it could be getting another job, but it's learning how to make your money work for you. And, that's a concept, just like when you heard about the indoor plumbing. It's a concept that you have to experience but learn as well. I have a friend who her grandfather invested in UPS. And so, and, she told me that there were people he worked with who didn't care about the stock they had through the company. And he bought their stock from them. They didn't value it. And so because he had so much stock at a certain point when UPS kind of blew up, he became rich and has generational wealth.
Obviously had a different mindset than the majority of the people around him.
And what she told me, he said, people can't see past the nose on their face. Back to the story.
Okay.
Went to the Army, 20 years later, retired. I'm guessing you got a job after the Army, huh?
Oh, from the Army, when I retired from the Army Reserve, I was actually the Dean of Education at Nicholls. I have to tell you a quick story, I never planned to go into education. I never planned to go into education. Back in those days, Iraq, Iran, they were all part of the NATO alliance. So at the end of the year, I played on the all Army basketball team. At the end of the year, whichever coach won the all Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine tournament, they got to pick who would go with them to the NATO tournament. And we played it in Fort Myer in Virginia in 1974. We lost to the Italians national team. And then the next year, it was in Thessalonica, Greece. And we won it, almost got killed. I'll tell you about that one day because the students rioted. But we flew from there down to Athens for a couple of days to relax on the beach. And then, the State Department at that time was big into goodwill tours. And they found out we were over there, that we had won. So they wanted us to go to Amman, Jordan, to teach Muslim kids how to play basketball. And if you know anything about Muslim culture, they frown upon the use of the left hand. It is frowned upon to the extent that, we trying to teach them to play basketball, that you have to play the whole court. But everybody would go to their right. They refuse to go to their left, And so I'm out there teaching them, this is what you have to do in basketball. You have to play the whole court. You have to start some plays on the right, but you have to start some plays on the left, So anyway, my coach at the time, the late Hal Fisher, came up to me and he said, Hill, have you ever thought about being a teacher? I said, oh, no, 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 coach. I said, I might want to be a coach one day, but I don't want to teach. And he said, what the hell do you think coaching is if it's not good teaching? And that planted the seed into me to come back after the Army and start working on my certification to be a teacher. I had a bachelor's degree, but I was not a certified teacher. So when I got back from the 3 years in the Army, I went right back to Nicholls, started working on my certification. The basketball coach asked me to be a student assistant, and I needed 24 hours to get certified. I got certified on a Friday afternoon. Superintendent sent for me and said he wants to talk to me. And he said, I got a job for you, starts Monday morning. That was on a Friday after I finished my certification. And he said, I have some kids that don't know how to add and subtract. I want you to teach them. And I said, no, I'm a social studies major. He said, you can add and subtract, can't you? I said, yes. He said, well, then you're the person for this job. So that's when I started teaching junior high school. And I've been employed ever since.
And so from junior high school, I can't imagine that, but
I loved it. I loved it.
So that just really, it's like confirmation. You loved it. You were a good teacher.
Well, let me tell you why I loved it. And I'll give you one specific example. I was teaching ninth grade civics. I had this one young lady. She was terrible. I would be lecturing and talking, and she would be murmuring under her breath. You can hear her, and she would be mocking me the whole way. And she was white. And I mean, it was, the other kids would look at me like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I restrained myself. I really restrained myself, you know. And so about the middle of the year, all of a sudden she stopped mocking me. And she started dressing up. She had been dressing like in the vernacular time, like a hippie. She started dressing and wearing nice clothes and taking a bath. And she started listening, being very attentive and everything. And we get toward the end of the year, and she got to a point she would say, okay, y'all need to be quiet because Mr. Hill is talking,
Oh,
you know?
wow.
And she made a complete 180-degree transformation. That's why I love teaching, because you encounter people who you think are lost, and before you know it, they have changed right before your eyes. Not That's not all everybody, don't get me wrong. But when you have those type of situations that take place in your life, then you become addicted to your profession.
I want to say your comment was you encounter people that you think are lost. Chances are they are actually lost, and you
Yeah,
help them to find themselves.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I've never seen her since then. 1977, I have never seen her again. But she made a complete change, and I hope she went on to live out the person that she had become.
That brings me to the topic of legacy, because you really have no idea how you have touched that young lady's life and how your legacy has a ripple effect. Her
Mm,
life being changed impacted maybe her children, her relationship with her parents, may have changed her parents because she became different. Other people around her may have decided to become different. Like, we never know the ripple effect of the seeds we plant in other people's lives.
you're right.
That's
You're
so
right.
amazing, right? Like, just like we look back and see how God, like the seeds people have planted in your life, I'm sure you never expected to accomplish all that. You knew you were going to work in an office. You wanted to. You knew you weren't going to be doing what the other people were doing. But I'm sure your life is like a miracle to you.
Uh, I suppose I never thought about it that way. I hear what other people say, and I sometimes sit down and wonder, what did I do to get all of these accolades and name recognition and stuff like that? I was just being like my mother, trying to help people. That's all.
Well, then let's just say it's because of the seed your mother planted that created the ripple effect. And it started with you. You have beautiful siblings. Um, you have beautiful children, grandchildren, and you've touched the lives of so many other people. And your mother planted a seed just with that relationship that the two of you developed, that quality, intimate time you shared together, made a big difference. And
Yeah.
like now, the reason you believe you're successful is because of her.
Yeah, I tell you, Donna. Yeah, thank you for those words. The thing that I think about the most is that next month she'll be gone 63 years, and I still miss her. Still miss her.
63 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. She had very big impact. That is awesome. Big love.
Yes, indeed. I
Yeah.
won't deny that.
All right. Middle school teacher. Then you went to coaching at Nicholls.
Mm-hmm.
Assistant coach, assistant professor of health and physical education,
Mm-hmm.
director of student teaching,
Mm-hmm.
interim dean of education, then the dean of education. Then you went on to have the education building renamed in your honor, the Cleveland Hill Hall in 2022. And just recently, there was this unveiling of this amazing bust that is very much in your likeness.
Thank you.
And I wasn't there, but where is it? It's in the education building?
No, actually, it's in the gymnasium, and it's
Oh,
by
yes.
design. It's by design. When I posed for it, I had my graduation gown, one we got from UNO. I had that on. But what we were trying to show, let me tell you a quick story. In 1968, before I came, getting ready to come in 1964, when I went to Mossfort, my high school had two guys who had just made professional football. And fast forward to 1968, one of those players was on campus one summer, and I was um, I was on campus that day. He had never said anything to me in my life, never. But he saw me and he called me over, come in. And I walked over to him. He said, I heard you going to school down there in Louisiana. And I said, yeah, that's where I'm going. He said, well, let me tell you something. He said, all that stuff that they try to teach in the classroom, don't fool with that stuff. Go play basketball so you can make the pros. Don't worry about all that learning and academic stuff. He didn't use the word academic, but he said, just don't worry about that. And I remember walking away from that conversation. I was thinking, like, wait a minute, that don't seem right. Why can't you do well in academics and in athletics? I remember that very well. So one of the things we wanted to do with the bus is to place it in the gym so people walking past it and seeing that gown on me,
I love it.
they can say, you can be a good athlete and you can be a good scholar at the same time. Don't ever think that in fact, you can do more than that, but don't ever make yourself one dimensional. Be multidimensional because you have the capacity to do it. So that's why it's in the gym, bridging the gap between athletics and scholarship.
Very nice. I love that vision. I love it.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I have a couple legacy questions for you, and let's just get through some of the other Kwanzaa principles first. So, principle 5 is Nia, which means purpose.
Mhm.
To make our collective vocation the building and development of our community in order to restore our people to their traditional greatness, which is, again, what you do or have been doing forever, right? Even when you were playing basketball, right? Not even, you were leading the team. So you had purpose and you were helping others and understood the importance of that unity and that cooperative economic part. And then Kuamba is creativity. Principle 6, to always do as much as we can in the way we can in order to leave our community more beautiful and beneficial than we inherited it. Again, Imani, faith, which is the last principle, day 7, which is January 1st, brand new year. And it's to believe with all our hearts in our parents, our people, our teachers, our leaders, and the righteousness and victory of our struggle.
Mhm.
And so as I read each of those principles, I was thinking, this is one of the reasons I wanted this interview. Yep, this is another one that aligns with the reason I wanted to do this interview. And so this last one, Imani means faith, and you've been doing Sunday school for 40 plus years. Who knows how many lives have been touched through the Sunday school, not to mention how much you've gained from it. As you stated earlier, you've learned something from me in this talk, so I can imagine you have learned a lot from others over the years in Sunday school. And so my legacy questions, and as we wrap up the discussion, what would you like your children and your grandchildren, even your wife, your son-in-laws, what would you like them to remember about you? when you're no longer here, or even advice? What encouragement or what words would you leave with them as they continue their life's journey?
Oh, that's easy. That's easy. When you work in cooperation with your fellow human beings, you gain much more than you give.
Is that how you would like to be remembered also?
Yeah. And, like you said, we've been having these Zoom Sunday schools now for 4 years. You know, even though I've taught a lot of classes, I have learned so much from working and discussing and dialoguing with all of you, you know. And when Miss Debbie and I decided to do this because we had a void there between the Sunday schools in Thibodeau, um, we didn't set out to make it a learning experience. We set out to make it something that we wanted to try to, I guess, remedy while we were all locked up in our homes. And hey, look how much I've learned from this. But it's because I'm working with and dialoguing and discussing with a group of people who are all on the same journey that I am. And even though we're on the same journey, we still can learn. We still never too old to learn. And so when you work in unity with a group of like-minded people, not only will you bring others to the to the fore, you gain so much yourself from doing what you do. So yeah, if we can teach all of our people that giving is gaining,
Hmm.
then we would have more people to reach out.
Right.
So yeah, that's my legacy. I give because I gain. These five appendages separated, they can't do very much. You put them together, they're going to accomplish a
Powerful.
whole lot more. They're much more powerful. Yes.
I like that. Okay, good. I really admire the unity in your family. Um, your children honor and respect the both of you. I can clearly see that they already know that working in community and giving is more powerful and more of a blessing than receiving, and they're living that every day. And they aspire to do more of it. And I think it's in part because of your example and Lois's example. And so I admire the unity that you have in your family. And so it's not only you who embody these principles of Kwanzaa, I see it in your family as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
How would you like to spend the rest of your life?
Well, I tell people quite often, physically I can't do the things that I used to could do. But right now, my mind is still pretty sharp, and I've told people a lot of times, when I was an administrator, a college dean, director, even when I was coaching basketball, I was in charge of things. And when I got things done, I got a tremendous amount of satisfaction from it. But there's a difference between satisfaction and joy. I get pure joy when I'm teaching. And if my mind stays okay, then I would like to continue doing that in some capacity as long as I can. I am not going to run a mile and I'm not going to high jump in anything, but if this old brain doesn't fail me, then I still love to be in front of some class somewhere teaching somebody how to be better at what they do. That's that's my answer.
Is there anything you'd like to say or anything that you can say um, to the younger men and women, the future generation of people, something that it maybe even, someone coming from the same type of start, um, with, maybe an alcoholic parent or a parent who isn't present, and any words of wisdom you can leave for a young person to help encourage them. Because as you stated, and I'm not going to remember exactly what the Steve Jobs quote was, but basically, when you look at your life in retrospect,
Mhm.
you can see, you can learn from it, and you can see where you can correct some of the mistakes you may have made. But young people can learn from our mistakes, and then they don't have to make some of them on their own. So is there any wisdom or any knowledge, anything you can leave that you think might be helpful to a young person who is struggling?
Well, first of all, our people as a whole have always had some level of difficulty in this society that we live in. Not as bad as in some other countries and other parts of the world. I understand that, but we have had levels of difficulty throughout. Okay. Sometimes I feel like those levels of difficulty are increasing again. Okay. But my words of wisdom to it, despite everything that's going on within our country, in our politics and our government and things like that, there are some opportunities if we look for them. Take advantage of the opportunities. I went into the Army during the middle of a war with a college degree when I didn't have to go. That was an opportunity for me to have a job. I've heard some young people say, um, I, you know, I would never work at McDonald's. I would never work at Burger King flipping burgers and stuff like that. If that's the only opportunity that you have, take advantage of it. You don't have to stay there, but you can learn some things from what you do there that you can take to the next level. So take advantage of the opportunities that you have, learn from those opportunities so that they can propel you to the next opportunity. Despite the times, do not let what's happening in this world, this country, don't let it stop you. There are opportunities somewhere out there. Find them, take advantage of them, and you'll be surprised what you can achieve.